Redditors who grew in poverty and are now rich. What's the biggest shock about rich people you learned? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. That rich people can afford to do things that save them money. Better health insurance and car insurance with lower deductibles. Higher quality food that keeps them healthy. Gym membership preventing future health incidences. Prompt car maintenance to avoid big repair costs down the line. Higher ed for better paying job. The list goes on and on. Answer, it's like the story of the boots. Poor man buys a pair of boots for 10 because that's all he can afford. Rich man buys a pair of boots for 75 that are better made. Poor man's boots wear out after 3 years, causing him to need to buy another 10 pair. That's all he can afford. The rich man's boots last him for 20-year farners. Poor man ends up spending more money than the rich man in the long run because he cannot afford the nicer pair of boots that will last longer. Story 2. More like lower middle class to upper middle class. But it blew my mind when I realized many people I know now frequently pay to have their house cleaned and grew up thinking that the cleaners being over was just a routine part of life. I was probably in my late 20s the first time I ever paid someone to clean. Same with things like moving, painting, house maintenance, stuff like that. I'm at a place where it makes more sense to save my time and pay for many of those things. But anytime I talk to my mom and mention it, she assumes it's something I'm doing myself because it never would have occurred to her to spend money on that. And for most of her life, she couldn't afford it. It's a pretty interesting divide just between the strata within middle class. Answer, I am literally spending the holiday weekend painting the parts of my house I don't want to pay someone else to do. I have an old house and used to work in historic home restoration, so I can't stomach the idea of hiring a cheap painter. I hired a former employee of mine, and he worked with me to piece it out with what I wanted to do versus what I wanted him to do in order to save some cash, because he isn't cheap. Fudge, I remember why I wanted out of this industry so bad. I'm in better shape than I ever was as a painter, and my body is eliminate me. It isn't even hot around here, and it's rough. My indoor job husband kept saying, we can do this part ourselves, and I knew it was going to be mostly me. House is looking good though, excited to see it changing. Story 3. I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination, and it might not be a shock to others, but going on vacation. When I was a kid, we just stayed home every summer. Never went anywhere. Stayed generally within the same 200 kilometers radius of where I live. We didn't have a lot of money. Now I go on vacation twice a year and I've been all over the world. 17-year-old me would be in awe. Answer, same. The only traveling my family does is short weekend trips to visit our family that lives a few states away. We drive because we can't afford plane tickets, and pretty much all we do is visit the family. We don't get to do anything really special or fun. I'm still waiting for the day when I'll finally get to see New York and especially Europe and Asia. Story 4. The freedom it provides. Freedom to not spend hours mowing their lawn, laundry, cleaning their own car, grocery shopping, freedom to eat healthy, freedom to prioritize exercise. Endless list. Those of us that don't enjoy this freedom sacrifice our few hours on earth performing these mundane tasks. Answer. Also, the more money you make, the more freedom you have at work. You can roll in whenever you want, take off early, extra long lunches. As long as your work is getting done, you won't have any consequences. Even if your work stops getting done, you'll have weeks before anyone cares. Whereas the employee making 18 an hour will get written up for being 10 minutes late. Story 5. Red Limbo by Alfred Lombrano. It's a sociological look about straddlers. People who grew up poor blue collar and make it to the upper middle class, upper class. I am one of them. It talks about the strengths and weaknesses these people have. If you own a business or organization, you want these people working for you because they're always hungry for more and seeking out new ideas and opportunity, but concerned about taking on too much risk. It also talks about how these folks have a lot of issues. Being a straddler, you might find it both difficult to go back to your blue-collar roots, finding it hard to relate to family and childhood friends because education, money, and experience have evolved your worldview, while at the same time you'll never fully fit into the new upper-class world you've worked your way into. Minor things like you didn't grow up golfing, so you can't get in with the richer folks socially as easy, to bigger things like code-switching accents or vocabulary, to suffering from constant imposter syndrome. Answer. Being a straddler, you might find it both difficult to go back to your blue-collar roots, finding it hard to relate to family and childhood friends because education, money, and experience have evolved your worldview, while at the same time you'll never fully fit into the new upper-class world you worked your way into. This is a feeling I've never even tried to articulate. Thank you for this recommendation. Story 6. Rich people eat a different meal for every meal and just like throw out leftovers. Growing up, my mom would make a giant pot of tomato sauce and we ate it until it was gone. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Answer: I lived and still do in extreme poverty. 2 to 3 meals a day is a luxury. I usually go with 1 meal a day and sometimes even skip, which can be a meanie since ironically a lot of people have no idea that losing weight is much faster than gaining it. 1 week I'm healthy weight, the next down to underweight after I worked months in gaining healthy one, just because I went few days not eating. Not eating became like casual things so far. So I have a rich friend, which is ironic since he's trying very hard to come off as poor and goes by, but I don't have any money, it's all my parents, which is BS. We would celebrate 4th of July together and it's still stuck in my head how he threw whole jerk burger because a fly landed on it. A fly? Call me unsanitary, but I ate leftover food at fast food places because if it's eatable, why waste it? I don't care about a bit of germs unless it falls in mud or similar. Story 7. Okay, so I got a job as a software engineer. I didn't win the lottery or marry into old money or anything, but the first few years of working in a well-paid career, I felt like I was going insane. It's hard to relate to your new coworkers when your hobbies are watching TV shows with friends and writing songs on a guitar your mentor gave you, and their hobbies are international travel, credit card hacking, and investing. My former boss once mentioned offhand that she pays all the travel costs for her family, and then her husband pays her his half once a year. And they had traveled a lot that year, and he was sort of shocked to find out that his half for that year was $15,000, which he did have available to pay her. At that time, I'd been in tech for 6 months and was very proud that I'd scraped together a $2K emergency fund for the first time in my life. Also, you get so much stuff for free as soon as you don't need it. My job paid for my monthly bus pass, my health insurance, even my morning coffee. That first job, they had a coffee shop in the lobby with 2 full-time baristas that was totally free. Honestly, some of the best espresso of my life. And even when I had no money, I was a coffee nerd. 2 of my co-workers bought coffee at the coffee shop down the street every day anyway, because they liked that coffee shop a little better. It was infuriating to be given all these perks that would have been life-changing the second I was also paid enough to afford them without it being a struggle. Something worth noting, if you work in a well-paid field like that, watch out for the people transitioning out of poverty. They were massively underpaying me, and I technically knew that, but it was still so much more than I had ever made in my life that I couldn't bring myself to believe the actual numbers for entry-level tech jobs. If it weren't for the unofficial Women in Tech group who did a salary-sharing spreadsheet and helped a ton of people advocate for raises and eventually got salary bands implemented, I would never have been brave enough to ask for what I was worth. And since raises are percentages that can impact your pay for the rest of your career, I try to pay it forward now. Answer: yes. I went from 32K to 57K and thought I was making bank at my new job. About a year and a great coworker was very transparent with his salary, and I realized I was very underpaid and I never knew. He pushed me to ask for a higher salary and now I'm around 75K. Talk to your coworkers about their salary. Not talking only benefits the company that's underpaying you. Yes, it's uncomfortable to ask for more money, but you are worth the same salary as everyone else. Story 8. I grew up pretty poor. My wife insanely rich. In my house, your car breaks down, you fix it, or take it to a mechanic to fix it. In her house, they would buy a new car. This dawned on me when our washing machine broke and I ordered the part on Amazon, and an hour later saw she had ordered a new washer from Lowe's. She's gotten better, but her first impulse is just to buy a new one of whatever is broken. Story 9. You know someone is really rich when they start emphasizing their humble roots. On their way up, they often try to hide it. Answer: truer words were never spoken. I grew up in the fields of Uttar Pradesh and the slums of Mumbai. I spent my whole life trying to somehow prevent people from finding that about me. It would have been mortifying. Now I make big bucks comparatively in finance in London. I am surrounded by people with PhDs, people who went to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or Stanford. I now proudly proclaim my roots from the rooftops. I will even show them my house in the village or the slum tenement I grew up in on Google Maps. Story 10. Shock is a strong word, but I didn't realize the social safety net rich people have. Growing up poor, we lived absolutely paycheck to paycheck. More accurately, we lived borrowing against future paychecks, and it felt like we were never far from homelessness. One job loss, one prolonged serious illness, and we would not have been able to pay the rent and would have been evicted. All of my parents' family and friends were similarly struggling, so if we needed help, they would not have had much to give. Now, as an adult with more money than my parents could have imagined having, we not only have substantial personal savings, but we also know so many people who could help us if things got bad. If worst came to worst, we have multiple friends with vacation properties that they barely use that we could move into. Not that I think it will ever come to that, but life is dramatically different, never having to worry financially about a job loss, illness, unexpected car expense, etc. Answer: everything just seems different when the constant threat of something disappears. I could even go as far as saying I'm bored without the chaos of a debt collector letter or eviction or loan agent who I thought for stupidly long was a whole jerk relative who just visited every week because my family screwed payday loans to all hell for 20 years, popping up every few days. Story 11. Money makes money. We're buying some land that has a waterfall. We could build our dream house, Airbnb it, and it could potentially pay for the house within 10 years. The money to buy the land came from diversifying our assets, our financial portfolio. We would take on some risk to build this house, getting another mortgage. But theoretically, if everything works, we wouldn't have spent anything but would get a free dream house and more. For what? For almost nothing. If we fudge up and lost our investment, burn the entire property down or whatnot, it'd still be fine. It wouldn't be life-ending. It'd be unfortunate but survivable. When I was growing up, my mom would make ramen for a special family meal, and she would use 3 ramen packets for our family of 4. She would add rice to the ramen broth after when we were still hungry. Once we used something, it would disappear. So we were frugal. A financial disaster meant starving, losing your home, etc. I spent my 10 for the week wrong. I can't afford lunch anymore and got to starve for a week. I could have never imagined that once you get enough money, it just makes more money. Einstein said that compound interest is the world's 8th wonder. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. You know when you're playing The Sims and in the beginning, you have to be careful about every dollar you spend? But after a certain point, when you're rich enough, it doesn't matter anymore. It's just numbers. That's what it's like for the most part. And you know how the game gets boring after you've bought everything in the game? The trick to getting rich life is that there will always be more expensive things that you can aspire to. Like I felt pretty good until I watched Owning Manhattan and was like, that Bad Bunny penthouse sure looks nice. But the key is to appreciate the things that money can't buy. Literally life, health, people, relationships, our planet, etc. Gratitude is a muscle, use it or lose it. Answer: on buying the land, this. My family was pretty well off when I was a kid, but my grandfather literally grew up in a shack with a dirt floor, no running water, and my great-grandmother decided to marry my great-grandfather because they had a pump, and she no longer had to walk a quarter mile to the creek to get water. That was 3 generations ago. 3. My grandfather went into the Navy, used the GI Bill for college, joined a steel mill, and eventually became president of one of the largest in the country. He taught my dad and his siblings how to save, how to invest, and my grandparents were pretty darn frugal in the early days. My dad and his siblings never wanted for everything, and they did some awesome things. Ski trips, boat ownership, trips to the Cape. But it wasn't until my grandfather retired around 55 that they became really well off. Generational wealth is extremely helpful. When my grandfather died, I took my inheritance and invested it. My wife and I own a home, are looking at adding a deck and hiring a landscaper to make our backyard look amazing, so we'll spend more time in it, and are considering buying a gorgeous Victorian in either Italy or California. We're not what would be considered ultra-high net worth, probably not even high net worth, but because my family took the time to show me how to invest, we are far better off than we'd be if I didn't know. Investing should be a high priority for anyone who can save a little. Story 12. While not rich, I still see everything as min-wage value. A can of Coke. Shoot, that's like 15th of an hour. No way I'm buying that. Eating out. No way I'm paying 4 hours to eat. Ignoring the fact I earn way more than the few times over min-wage. Can't get myself to spend stuff. Funny is that people who never came from poverty don't seem to value money as much. I had a guy going out to lunch at work. He'd grown up in a home with a private swimming pool. H ordered a meal at lunch in a restaurant. Took one bite and said, "Nah, I'm not hungry," and paid the bill, and we left. Blew my mind. Answer: when I was in college, I worked at UPS unloading the semi-trailers in the mornings. It took 1 hour to unload a full semi with packages stacked tight in every square inch. I was being paid $8 an hour at the time. For the longest time, every purchase I made was in semi-trailer trucks. Like if I saw a shirt for $24, I would ask, is this shirt worth emptying 3 entire fudge semis? Definitely made me frugal. Story 13. The richer you are, the more free stuff you get. Your account balances are so big that maintenance and overdraft fees are waived, and you occasionally get large bonuses simply for transferring some of your money from one account to another. Companies that are eager to do business with you provide you with free samples or even trips to their exotic locales. Answer: and you don't even have to be that rich. Because I travel for work, I have the highest elite status with Marriott. That in turn gets me the second lowest United status. Even that little bump in status gets me no charge economy plus, no charge check bag, United Club access free once a year, club access at a discount, and more. I just booked a room at one of the more expensive Marriott properties for a mini vacation. I got it at half the normal rate because of a thanks for being you offer. That's on top of my 5 free nights and 5 room upgrades. Last time we were on a mini vacation, we had a last-minute change in plans. Can I get a late checkout? Absolutely. What time? 4 p.m.? Don't worry about it. Just let us know when you leave. Car rental, National Emerald Club. I walk out and pick my car, $44 a day flat. Through my job, I came into contact with Millionaire Flight Services. Long story short, I had a long 6-hour layover coming back from Afghanistan at a relatively barren airport in Indiana. I walked over to the General Aviation Terminal and went to Millionaire and handed them a card I had been given. Right this way, sir. Refreshments, sleeping chairs, TV, newspapers, power, internet. Travel gets a whole lot less sucky with even a slight upgrade. Story 14. I grew up with qualifying for free lunch in school, so below poverty line. My dad did everything from fixing the cars, changing oil, building the house, buying everything used, growing his own food, etc. At a certain income level, it makes less sense to do anything other than work. Rich people make so much more than everyone else. They just pay people to do everything. Answer: when my maternal grandmother's dementia went downhill, she moved in with us and effectively became her nurse. My grandmother had no significant retirement savings, and her home barely made a profit when we sold it because it was filthy and falling apart. For some reason, Medicaid rules meant we needed to wait 2 years to put her in a nursing home, which meant my mom had to be her nurse. Elder care is another area that often falls on and breaks the backs of the poor and working poor. Story 15. When we had our first children, twins, we were poor. We went through the process and had 2 healthy boys. A few years later, I had a stable job with medical insurance when we had our 3rd child. Everything was nicer. They didn't push us out of the hospital so fast. All the basic care was the same, but I was shocked at how much better we were treated with insurance. Story 16. I went from my family being on welfare as a child, not having enough money for food when times were hard, to now, I may make 7 figures next year and close to that this year. Most of my money I make in real estate. A couple things I've noticed. 1. It's absurdly easy to make money when you have money. All rich people are essentially using a cheat code. They don't necessarily work harder. They don't necessarily work smarter. It's just way easier to make money. The system is truly rigged in 10,000 different ways. The only hard thing is making your first million. 2. Time is the ultimate wealth. 3. Nothing is more expensive than being poor. 4. Do whatever you have to in order to make enough money to be secure and comfortable and have investments. In the long run, it is so worth it. Work a second job, go back to school, whatever you have to do. Save enough money for down payment and buy a house. Just work like a smart demon for 5 years and buy that house with an extra unit you can rent out. Things will get so much easier. Life is super long and it will be worth it, I promise. Answer: one of the reoccurring themes in this thread is have investments, but I feel like one of the things that is overlooked by the commenters, at no fault of any of you, is that as someone coming out of poverty and just now starting to make good money, I have no freaking clue what have investments. I pay into the 401k that my job provides. And then what? I have a hard time believing everyone is paying into Robinhood or something. Like, I genuinely don't know how someone goes about starting to actually invest in a meaningful way or where to even get the knowledge to do so. And I think that's another aspect that doesn't really get talked about. There is a huge knowledge gap between poverty and rich on how to make money work. Story 17. They almost have a very different understanding of how the world works, and often more accurate, comparing to ordinary people. It's like the world is a game, and they simply have a far better understanding of the rules and hacks. Answer: here's the dark second part of this. They know, and they don't care that the game is rigged in their favor. The ultimate divide and the reason why meaningful change won't happen unless we take a bottom-up approach is that the wealthy of this country, while they may not state this outright, believe they are better than other people. For many of them, They see poor people as almost a different species, and that it basically isn't worth helping them because poor people are too stupid or selfish to know how to help themselves properly. Story 18. I see very few people actually answering OP's question. Probably because people who grew up in poverty and are rich don't spend a lot of time posting on Reddit or advertising their wealth online. However, I've been around two people in my life that started out as lower middle class, not necessarily in poverty, and ended up rich. They were both very driven, smart, and had an inexhaustible supply of energy that they dedicated to the ongoing growth and success of their businesses. In general, they are on or working from the time they get up until they go to bed, always entertaining clients, potential clients, or doing something else related to the growth of their company. I have no desire to sacrifice myself to a company in that way. I prefer to have more time to spend with my family and friends. Answer: this isn't answering OP's question. That, or you've misunderstood it. It looks like you're implying that rich people work insane hours. On the whole, this isn't true, at least not when you account for the fact that their personal lives and household chores are done for them by other people. Rich people only work longer hours on paper, but they typically have far more autonomy and flexibility in how they arrange their time, which is a massive boon in and of itself. With cleaners and personal assistants, they can work 80-hour work weeks because all their other everyday human tasks are taken care of. Story 19. Your poor friends will kind of resent you for it. Never, ever, ever tell anybody how much money you have. It will only bring sadness and misery. Also, the desire to become rich can be a kind of mental illness that is the result of being raised in poverty. I am not super rich. My net worth puts me in the top 10. I have enough to retire and live the rest of my life in comfort if I chose to stop working. But I still feel this constant anxiety that I don't have enough or something is going to happen and I will lose it all and be homeless. I think what we are experiencing in the US today is that the ultra-wealthy billionaires have become mentally ill. I mean, if someone is worth $1 billion, they could spend $120 a day for 30 years and still die with money. But all they can think about is, how can I get $2 billion? These mental patients would rather destroy democracy than to have to pay taxes. It is madness what they will destroy to do it. Story 20. While I wouldn't call us rich, my husband and I are now both high earners, so we definitely have way more money than I did growing up. My mom was always good at making do, and I didn't really realize we had no money until I was in high school. Some of her ways of grocery shopping on a strict budget and making things when you can instead of buying them are still things I do. But we now get to do things like go on nice vacations. When our kids were younger, we could pay for all their various activities instead of limiting them to one or two. Buy them new gear instead of used. Now we pay for their college tuition. The best part is the peace of mind. We don't stress about emergency maintenance to our house or what if the car breaks down. We pay people to do yard work and have time and money for our own hobbies. We both still work full-time, but at jobs that give a lot of paid vacation time. I'm very grateful that I have been able to spend more time with my kids and with far less stress than my mom did. But my mom is definitely a superwoman. And a lot of why I have what I have is because of how I grew up and how she raised me. Story 21. People who grew up wealthy think they are doing you a favor by giving you a job, and no amount of perfection will change that. People who grew up poor, middle class that employ you, think you are doing them a favor for doing a good job. Story 22. It's been really nice to have the option to pay for added convenience and time back in my day. I grew up poor, and it was the opposite. We would actively inconvenience ourselves if it meant saving any money. Parking far away in the cheapest lot, rifling through bargain bins, borrowing my aunt's boyfriend's pickup to grab used furniture from Craigslist ads. Story 23. Penniless immigrant as a child, multimillionaire in my 40s. Nothing about it has shocked me. Having more free time to pursue interests and the freedom to do what I want when I want was expected. I do notice that I am much more mindful of how I treat the people I meet, that life has sort of slowed down for me to a degree that I can be more introspective and put more effort into being a nicer person. As opposed to running around head down, trying to make my way out of poverty in my 20s. Does that make any sense at all? Redditors. Thought about it and something did shock me after all, that all rich people need to buy umbrella insurance because you become a walking target for lawsuits more so than if you weren't rich anyway. Umbrella insurance is probably the most important thing I spend on, more so than health insurance even. Story 24. How much easier it is. Everything is easier. So much stress is reduced. You are never one paycheck away from being homeless. Something breaks? Replace it. Need something? Get it. Car always starts. Heat always runs. Bill comes, I pay it. kid needs something for school, I get it. Hungry, eat, anywhere. Someone else cleans my house, fixes my plumbing, mows my lawn, and works on the appliances if needed. Everything is easier. I didn't recognize how much mental capacity these things take and how much stress it causes until I had enough money that they went away. Story 25. I grew up middle class, but had some quite lean years as a young man. Then through little fault of my own, I came into some money. The thing that really amazed me was how, once you have money, particularly well-planned investment money, you can really take advantage of the tax system's many loopholes and what seemed like gifts to the idle investment classes. When I was an hourly worker, it seemed like a big part of my income went to various withholding taxes I never saw and had little or no chance of getting back. But once I had a few bucks coming in, and a good tax accountant to see me through the incredibly labyrinthine U.S. tax regulations and laws, I was dumbfounded by what a relatively easy ride I could get. I get it that we want to encourage investment. I started my own business. My customers seemed satisfied, and I made some decent money. But I have to say that when I contrasted my tax situation with my prior life as a working man, I could not get over how much easier it was to make money when I already had money, a business, and, perhaps crucially, a good tax accountant. The current system is not fair. It was created by people who already have wealth, by people who really want those wealthy people to keep giving them money and keep getting favorable tax policy in return. I came from a conservative, libertarian background. But look around. The people with wealth and power use that wealth and power to hang on to wealth and power. Here's the thing. I'm a businessman, and I know all too well that a consumer economy cannot thrive or even survive if all the money is redirected into the pockets of the already wealthy. We need truly fair, equitable, progressive taxation that shifts more burdens from the employed class to the investing elites in order to provide a sustainable economy that benefits all hardworking citizens, not just the elites who pay for bespoke tax policies designed to enhance and contain wealth to the upper classes. Story 26. I'm not rich, but I spent the first half of my life working class poor, the second half destitutely poor, and now am comfortably middle class. Wow, that is wild to think. Many upper middle class and up folks genuinely believe they are working class or middle class or just getting by. I've had people getting $50K kitchen renos done by interior designers tell me they're poor, or people with brand new cars they bought in cash, or people who travel to Europe for weeks at a time, several times a year. They will say things like, well, I bought the car in cash, but I had to save for several years to afford it, not realizing that a working class family could try and save forever. They aren't ever going to be able to afford a $75K vehicle in cash. Or, well, the kitchen before was so disgusting and was falling apart, it had to be upgraded, not realizing that for actual poor or working class people, they just keep the disgusting kitchen. I used to argue with these people when I was poor because I would get so angry at how clueless they were. Now I still get annoyed, but I've learned to just smile and nod politely and let them live in their woe is me world. Answer: I've had terrible anxiety all my life. When I was little, one thing I did that helped was make a worry box. Anytime something was bothering me, I'd write it down and add it to the worry box. Articulating the problem helped me understand why it upset me and sometimes even helped me find a solution. The first few papers were about how I couldn't get regular meals, how I couldn't have sleepovers because I was afraid my parents would hurt my friends, how my clothes didn't fit and it was causing bruises or joint pain. Once I was on my own, I worried about rent or projects at work. Nowadays, it's that I had a bad interaction with a cashier or had a headache. What really surprised me is no matter how well my life is going, my worry box is always full. Life's never perfect, I'm never completely happy, and my to-do list is never finished. It's just that the baseline for what upsets me is higher. I honestly wonder if I could still deal with the things that set off my anxiety when I was a kid. Story 27. When I married a doctor from a wealthy family, I thought the large family would be intellectually challenging and fun. I quickly discovered that the main topics of conversation focused on keeping people from getting their money and stain removal. They love to talk about stain removal. Story 28. I didn't grow up in poverty and I'm not a billionaire today, but I've leveled up quite a few times from where I started. My job is a lot easier than it was when I worked minimum wage, but a lot fewer people would be able to do it because it requires so much technical background knowledge. You're paid on the value you bring, not on how much labor you provide. Story 29. I'm not rich, but my husband and I make well over $500,000 a year. That sounds like a lot until you learn that we live in Mountain View, California. He works at Stanford and I work for a social media company here. We do well, we have no kids, and we save a lot of our income. I grew up super poor on and off until I was a late teen. Like my father hunted for our protein and my grandma mended my brother's hand-me-downs for me, my husband grew up reasonably upper middle class, maybe bottom level of wealthy. The biggest things I've learned? One, that the desire to be rich one day is itself a religion, a kind of religion. It's a dogma that we say prayers to. There are rituals around it. There's this almost spiritual belief in an I'll be rich one day afterlife of imagining one's post-scarcity paradise. In reality, once you get rid of all the things that drive you by occupying much of your time and energy, you are left with your own demons. I'm a gay guy from one of the poorest parts of Ohio, and from a right-wing Pentecostal family. Under normal circumstances, my needy kids, a job, a wife, and the stuff of life would keep my mind occupied. Freed of that, I've had time to unpack an incredibly painful childhood, which has not really been the paradise I hoped for. Until I arrived at this place, this myth about one day I'll be rich and happy when I have X amount of savings was a lie. It was myth. It was like a religion that kept me working and kept driving me forward. One day I reached the promised land and discovered that it's mostly sophistry. Happiness is the pursuit of happiness. It is in belonging to others and in having a purpose to those we love. 2, miserable people are mostly miserable no matter what. Happy people tend to be happy no matter what. There are exceptions. Below a certain amount of income, the circumstances of life drain and destroy you. If you earn enough to buy back all that suffering, waiting in lines, crappy healthcare, clipping coupons, worrying about rent, what you're left with is a space where you can thrive. People born to be miserable cunts will be miserable no matter what. People who would be happy but can't because of poverty may probably thrive. And those who are happy will just be happy no matter what happens. 3, rich people, I mean really rich people, really are different. Since I'm surrounded by SV wealth and have a few friends with 8 and 9 digit worth, they just are different. I have a friend in the 8-digit range. She is utterly obsessed with her earthiness. I'm just like everybody else. We were strolling down the street in San Francisco after lunch. She went on and on and on about how she's not disconnected from reality. Then in one moment, she took a call from her husband. Okay, we'll just call Bob and have him charter us a jet. We can get to Las Vegas in like an hour. I was like that Indian football coach meme staring at her. Excuse me, Marcia. That statement was not a just like everybody else's statement. Next to nobody else ever says the words, well, charter a jet when getting to Vegas in under 4 hours becomes so inconvenient that they don't want to drive. 4, no matter how rich you are, you're out of touch with someone struggling at a less entitled position as you. I'm not rich, but the luxuries to which I've become accustomed are hard for me to live without. My husband works at a hospital and we have great tech worker insurance. So when we go to the hospital, we just go in and any doctor will see us. We fly mostly business class and anything other than that is quite literally painful. Maybe you can't afford those things, but if, say, you live in the US and have a house, food, clothing, and not much else, there's someone far worse off than you. Somewhere on earth, they're suffering. You're not. And the hardest thing about our reality is that there is only so much of our time and energy any one of us can spend thinking about it. 5. The greatest joy you get from having money is the freedom from worry that it buys and the ability to do really great, kind things for your loved ones. It's nice being able to afford doing stuff for our friends and family. It's nice being able to not have to do so many of life's super annoying things. It's nice getting time away to go on vacation. Buying stuff? Not worth it for me. It's all about the time I get with my husband. Story 30. How often they talk about money. I dated a very wealthy woman once and hung out with some of her friends. People just chat about their savings and investments. Oh, I have $1 million over here. I made a few $100,000 on this upswing, etc. Poor people don't talk about money because they don't have any, and if they get some, they don't want anyone to know. Story 31. How boring it is to be wealthy. After a while, everything becomes dull. 3-star restaurants, elite travel, parties, etc. It's amazing at first, cause everything you dreamed about as a kid comes close to true. But over time, the parties are the same. Travel just means you're bored but in a new location. And that new plate with morels and asparagus foam isn't even worth a second glance. It's so easy for your life to lose purpose. There is no work relying on you, no family you need to be the breadwinner for, no house to fix up, no lawn to take care of. You have no goals. You simply exist. Some turn to golf, some to substances, some to the arts, some to politics, some to philanthropy. Anything to fill the days and not think about the void. This isn't a complaint, nor should you respond with a let me have all your money law, 'cause I get it. Of course, it is better to be rich and bored. What a luxury. But it was surprising to me. Answer: I'm curious about this because it seems like this would be a fairly common feeling. So why aren't there more people volunteering or going back to work? Is it purely because they don't have to? Or have they tried and it just doesn't give them any purpose? I know you only have your experience, but are there others that feel the same as you, that didn't get lost in substances or something bigger? Story 32. You straight up cannot get rich in certain parts of the country. You need solid infrastructure to make it. I had to drop my entire support system and move to a city 300 miles away, but it worked out. Story 33. I went from throwing mulch bags to president of the North American division of a global publicly traded company in about 10 years. I didn't grow up poor by my definition. There are and were far poorer in the US. I make a lot by most measures now. I'm 10-20 years younger than the other division managers and 20 younger than the board. I'm the only person that didn't come from generational wealth. I went to my CEO's home, which is the top 2 floors of an apartment building, about 200 yards away from the palace where the king lives. The rest make general mention of their home in Cannes, stable, or visiting their cousin's private island in the Mediterranean. I used to be intimidated and like they knew things I didn't. I'm sure they know things and have experiences I didn't. I'm the same. I have experiences and knowledge they don't. However, I didn't grow up with the crutch they did. It makes even the smartest of them easy to predict. When a person assumes they're smarter than everyone, you can play into their hubris and get the upper hand, which is why I am where I am. I've never seen such ego and hubris before in my entire life. They're not smarter. They're not more talented. They're definitely not more capable. They just have the tools that have passed down through their family for generations, not just tangible assets. There is no smartest room you ascend up into. There's just a much higher chance for people with a crutch to get that high up. It has more with your ability to predict and influence the future. They use their background as their input data. It's just as narrow as a kid who never left his town in Mississippi. Story 34. Rich people don't always appreciate what they have if they've grown up with all their needs fulfilled. Story 35. The doors in Ivy League education opens. The relatives who went to Yale could retire early. The friends whose law degrees come from state schools are DAs, struggling in private practice and low-level corporate attorneys. Also, custom-designed homes don't really cost that much more than other new homes if you have cash on hand. Story 36. I'm not rich, but definitely better off than I used to be. The biggest change for me is just being able to buy whatever I want whenever I want it. I don't have to save up a few dollars per paycheck, then decide if I still want the thing when I get the money. This is also a bad thing because I just keep buying crap I don't need because I can afford it. Also, taking trips, vacations. Growing up, my only vacations were to visit my cousins 2 states away, and I would have to meticulously pack for it because if I forgot something, I just have to go without. Now, I go on a trip at least once a year, and I'm not as anxious about forgetting something because I can just get a new toothbrush or phone charger or whatever if I need one. Story 37. I would not say I am rich, more like middle class. Not worrying about bills like my parents did and not worrying about where food comes from is insane. It's like they and us kids were stressed all the time. And I had no idea how freeing it is to not worry. I can actually plan for the future too. Wild. Story 38. I'm not super rich, but I have an order of magnitude more money than my parents. 1. Rich people guard personal information more. 2. They guard talking about their friends more. 3. They assume you are rich, successful too, just by dint of the fact you're talking to them. You don't have to prove yourself. 4. They have a hard time understanding what's not common knowledge for you. E-wise, how academia works, investing works, even if you say you don't understand how it works. 5. People need plausible deniability to associate with you. There has to be a good legible reason for why you are friends, assuming that you are otherwise deviant in some way. Story 39. I fall into the opposite category, grew up upper middle class. Living as a member of the working poor in the U.S. now, as a middle-aged adult. My waspy parents don't believe in handouts, so I've never been the recipient of their constant financial support. Even though they could have absolutely managed that, I've always worked, but not in a field that provides a lot of income, much to their probable dismay. I was also a single mother for 9 years, which was also to their dismay. Now that I've settled down and found a husband, they're so keenly interested in my husband's career and professional growth, whereas I'm still just bungling a career working with animals. It's a point of shame. I have the cultural capital of someone with former access to the trappings of the upper middle class. Education, decent teeth, style, knowledge of fine art and music, cuisine, travel, etc. But I now live in a world where this means nothing if not total snobbishness. However, this has made me understand that the American dream is a closed casket. The bootstraps are a lie. Story 40. Without realizing it, the rich start to dislike the poor simply for being poor, as if they could help it. And being rich is the normal way of life, I think, because it protects them from the reality that they have more than others, and it's not fair. It is a shocking thing to learn. Story 41. How nonchalant they are about buying things out of convenience. Big things, like my car broke down a few times because it's getting older, and things naturally wear out and need to be replaced. I'll fix it up. Them, time to buy a new car because fixing this one is inconvenient. I could never. Story 42. Doing something yourself is not always the most financially optimal solution. I grew up where we would do every bit of car maintenance, even repairing a totaled car, and home repair by ourselves. And we would laugh that we were the smart ones saving a ton of money. But if we could make 100 working on something else for an hour and pay someone 100 to do that task that would take us longer than an hour, that's the optimal solution. Story 43. We are comfortably middle class, but I have spent time with both sides. The wealthy do not realize how being poor makes life so difficult. It's not as easy as, go get a job. It's when there isn't enough money for food, but your car brakes are going, and you need your car to get to work. Where do you spend then? The wealthy are used to being able to solve a lot of problems with money. Additionally, the wealthy are able to circumvent a lot of issues of money. In the above example, the wealthy will have the money to regularly maintain their car so the brakes don't become a problem. I also think the wealthy assume that every person has had the same opportunities that they have had, which I find very untrue. It's easy to tell a homeless person to get a job when you've always had access to one. Maybe dad made some calls. Access to better education, mental health care, a stable upbringing, etc. Conversely, I think the poor resent the rich for not understanding the real struggle of being poor and how it creates stress in every part of your life. The constant worrying about finances, trying to make money last, the crushing blows of minor emergency like car repairs, or even something like being asked to be in a friend's wedding and having to say, no BC, you can afford the money or time off to help with the parties, buy the attire, etc. I remember when we were quite poor, a young couple with young kids that had poured all our money into making a new business work, and on our only date night we had had in 3 years for our anniversary, we were gifted a gift card to a restaurant. While inside, someone stole my husband's keys from his pocket while we were standing at the crowded bar, unlocked our car in the parking lot, and stole all our kids' Christmas gifts that were in the trunk, our stroller, and both kids' car seats. I bawled my eyes out BC. I knew we couldn't afford even new car seats, much less the Christmas gifts that I had been picking up year-round on sale the few times my kids weren't with me. A wealthy colleague of mine just said, well, at least it was all just replaceable stuff. I know he meant it in a look on the bright side way, but I remember thinking he was so out of touch. Story 44. I grew up in poverty, and I'm now comfortable and surrounded by people who grew up in a different world to me. My colleagues don't understand why I still have a lot of anxiety about being able to afford food. Story 45. I grew up living on struggle meals. Sometimes went without eating to make sure my siblings had food, while my parents preferred to focus on getting high, stoned, partied too hard, etc. I made my first million a few years ago, and each year after that, I've made even more money. At this point, I'm definitely getting close to the point where I could retire early if I wanted. The biggest shock is just how much is available to them for free or at a lower cost, despite them not actually needing things to be cheaper. My health insurance plan, USA, is cheaper now than it was even when Obamacare was in place to try and make things affordable, and it's a far better plan too. At one point, I was paying almost $400 a month to have full coverage on a car. Now, $78 a month. Industry events, trade shows, top-level networking events will have these extravagant goodie bags with each one being a couple $1,000 in value. If there's food and/or drinks, similar stuff is going on. Just a room full of wealthy people picking at prime rib, bluefin tuna, salmon, etc. Shoot is wasteful as hell, but nobody cares. There's absolutely a point where you have enough money to pay for most anything, but some companies will just throw shoot at you and say, here you go, use this, have this, I insist, despite it being entirely unnecessary. It's fudge weird. Story 46. They are not unusually smart. The ones I have interacted with and dated could not tell you much about science, philosophy, arts than your average person. Their intellect is limited to career knowledge. Most don't have too many passions in life outside of maintaining their lifestyle, as in acquiring wealth and hoarding it. This includes spending less and finding good deals. Of the families that I have interacted with, many of the children never developed the same drive that their parents had that led to their success. Answer: the ability to delay gratification is not the same as the ability to solve puzzles and match patterns. Together, they can do amazing things, but one doesn't need to be a genius to work hard, save the extra, and invest over decades. Compound interest over 25 years is the real miracle. But you have to put in early to get later. By the time many people figure this out, it's too late for them. But even if they do, they won't put their kids in league with time either, perpetuating the state another generation. Story 47. Freedom and how easy it can be to make large sums of money. Example: flip 300K into 500K and make 200K profit in a very short time frame with minimal work. And the flip side, how easy it is to waste large sums of money. Story 48. Not wealthy enough to quit working yet, but my salary and savings investments are far greater than I ever imagined. Growing up without a lot of money, we always talked about how much things cost. Cheap, getting a good deal, buying the least expensive of an item, being unreasonably frugal, etc. The biggest thing I learned is that the least expensive item is not always the best value. Spending a little more for higher quality is better than just wasting money on garbage. The second is how money is a good way to save time and hassles. For example, taking my car to the mechanic for maintenance and repairs, even though I am capable of doing it, allows me to have free time on the weekend to do what I want. Ditto for home repairs, just hire somebody. My father was incredibly hardworking and frugal, annoyingly so. I remember he and I went on a hunting trip together. I opened a bag of potato chips and started eating. He said those have to last all week, meaning I was eating too many. I said, well, just go to town and buy more. His head about exploded, thinking we would just buy more of what we want as opposed to rationing the chips all week. Story 49. Good question. I found that rich people don't do anything for themselves they can get someone else to do. They love to delegate. If they were born rich, they often don't do anything approaching manual labor. Self-made rich people often don't mind getting their hands dirty. I would also argue that the longer someone has been rich, the more likely they are to let you know they're rich. Story 50. There is a wild difference between people who are born rich and people who come into it from work or windfall later in life. The hereditary wealthy call them nouveau riche. The idea being that they come from low origins, so they don't appreciate the finer things like art and culture. If you never wanted for something, then nothing has value. If you never had to forgo lunch at school all week so you would have money on the weekend, you can't appreciate the value of paper money at all. If you never had to hold down a job to pay rent and bills, you can't appreciate what a job means to people. This I'm very serious about. I've had jobs where I had to scream internally because it took all my might not to say the thing that would get me fired. Sometimes it was a grave injustice, but often it was just an overbearing jerk of a boss. Very common in all minimum wage jobs, and quite a few that pay better actually. Ever worked in sales? An example of not understanding value. I was in the day room of an extremely wealthy client. His family owns a vast number of properties and companies. They are all the second generation of a family that started off with a very small business that just happened to be doing the right thing at the right place at the right time. Guy has an immaculate Gibson guitar mounted over the fireplace. Looks just like a famous person's famous guitar. I ask about it. The owner doesn't play guitar, isn't into the artist who it looks like it belongs to. Yes, that is the original worth over 6 figures. It looks nice up there, doesn't it? Story 51. When you have money, you can buy your way out of even the smallest problems. The rotating dinner you promised your friends not working out? Buy the food. Your bestie invites her insufferable boyfriend to join up on a girls' week vacay? Buy another hotel room. Your pet needs an amputation or $8,000 in vet bills? $8,000 it is. Get in trouble with the law? Hire a good attorney and face minimum consequences. Story 52. No need to buy expensive cars, clothes, shoes, bags as a status symbol. If they do, it's an understated item. Wealth is quiet, stocks, real estate, etc. Story 53. I wouldn't say I'm rich as such, but I have a good UK middle-class wage, and a lot of the people I know now grew up upper middle class. My family are solidly working class, and the fact I earn $50K is an unreal amount of money to them. The main difference I've noticed between us is education and what was seen as an appropriate aspiration for them. I went to a pretty crap state school, and because I was pretty clever, did all right before dropping out of uni. The fact I work in IT consultancy for the government and earn what I do is a massive success for me. My sisters don't earn anything like that much, and my parents never did. My friend grew up very well and went to a fancy private school in Northampton. He's been a secondary school teacher for about 15 years now and earns a little bit more than me, but considers himself a massive failure because his mates from school are senior armed forces types or high up in the civil service. Because my school considered 5 A to C's a success, getting a good job in an office was the best I could imagine. He went to a school that trained cabinet ministers. Our views of what we could and deserved to do with our lives are miles apart. It's fair to say I'm a lot happier than he is. Story 54. I learned that once you obtain a certain level of wealth, you can establish a situation where your money generates more money than you may actually need. And with enough capital, this requires neither business ownership or property ownership to do. Dividends, market return rate with occasional trimming, simply routinely selling covered calls with profitable positions, and other methods can each allow the ultra-wealthy to make money without having to work in the traditional sense. When people say their family has money, this is often what they're referring to. Story 55. Use and throw culture. Fan does not work, buy a new one. Car does not work, buy a new one. You cannot finish your food, just throw it out. Concept of leftovers in doggy bag simply does not exist. I simply cannot fathom wasting food. Story 56. Rich people who grew up rich are very unhappy. They are the ones that complain the loudest about their food service price at a restaurant. The slightest derivation from their expectations makes them unhappy, angry. I saw a lot of this from rich tourists in Miami. Story 57. Money deaf buys happiness. But once you get a good amount, more doesn't really matter unless you're materialistic. Also, most upper middle class and rich people are lazy off and spend way more time than you think on leisure. Story 58. There is absolutely no limit to being rich. And there is rich, and then there is wealthy. Flight private on your own plane is rich. Flight private on your own plane from your own FBO to your other FBO in another hemisphere, because the winter is getting you down as wealthy. Rich people still work out of a perceived or real need, especially because they see other more rich people and they think they are not rich enough. Wealthy people don't work unless they want to. Story 59. The more you donate, the more people just expect it from you with little to no fanfare. And the more you have, the more they expect you to donate. It starts to feel sickening, and I totally get why the rich aren't always as generous as I expected. Story 60. My husband grew up extremely poor, probably poorer than most of the people answering in this post. I grew up upper middle class, and I've helped him basically upgrade to that lifestyle. The biggest shock for him is food. Diets are completely different. Story 61. I grew up below the poverty line, and my mom kicked me out when I was 17. I moved in with my boyfriend and his family, who were upper middle class. It was definitely a shock. I remember Mom telling me to add food drinks that I like to the grocery list. I was shooketh. Just put what I want on there? They got me whatever I put on that list. It was so bizarre to my little teenager self. Story 62. The amount of free stuff they get. I grew up poor and am still poor, but my best friend who adopted my kids comes from old money. They are constantly getting free shoot. No wonder they save so much money when they don't have to pay for things like poor people do. Story 63. Smarts and education mean nothing. Ambition is everything, meaning everyone is smart and educated enough. Story 64. They teach their kids to manage money by giving them money to manage, instead of having their kids take on a lot of debt. Generational wealth ensues. Story 65. We grew up getting donations from churches so we can eat dinner. We drank powdered milk and lived in basements. We were very skinny. I started working when I was 12. Wife and I make $300K a year. What I've noticed is all these rich people think they got here because they are smart. We all got lucky. There are smarter and harder working people who never got rich. Most of these people are average intelligence, and they don't work very hard. Story 66. That there are two types of rich people. Ones that work to be rich and are usually decent people. Ones that inherited wealth and on percentage are often jack jerk. Story 67. How much easier everything is. and how much less dire. When you're poor, you're very inflexible and you tend to look forward to specific things because it's all you have. So if something goes wrong, it's a double letdown and hard to get over. A delayed flight means a ruined first vacation, maybe only vacation ever. A new game console is broken, no replacement. You get sick, you can't pay rent or your car insurance, maybe you lose your job. Story 68. They're cheap penny pinchers who will Venmo request every penny they feel entitled to, but expect your generosity. Story 69. I really wanted the freedom to tell anyone and everyone to fudge right on off, without having to worry about getting fired, I guess. Story 70. Honestly, how kind most folks are in higher income brackets. Not poverty, but lower middle class growing up. And at least in my hometown, there was a lot of crabs and a bucket mentality. Lots of people trying to bring others down, and lots of jealousy and resentment at people who were able to change their lot in life. I had family scoff at me when I told them I wanted to go to college and was mocked by my own father at my ambitions. A lot of defensiveness for why I wanted to get out of my small town and do something meaningful with my life. Have like 2 friends from my upbringing I keep in touch with, but now everyone is so self-assured and actively happy about others' success. People try to lift others up instead of tear them down. It's an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mindset. Just because you have doesn't mean that I can't also have. It's so refreshing, and I'm so much happier with my social circles in life now. Story 71. I wouldn't call myself rich, but I'm doing all right. The biggest thing is that being poor is really expensive. Having money makes everything cheaper, and it makes your time more valuable. Plus, the way our economy works, money often produces more money. Story 72. Definitely grew up poor, and I am now elderly and comfortable. I would not define myself as rich. I do live in a neighborhood with rich people, though. My observations. Rich people have just as many mental illnesses as poor people. Rich people are often nice but not kind. Rich people pretend to care, but are often either oblivious or apathetic about the plight of the poor. Everyone is different, but I believe my observations to be true. Story 73. I'm not rich, but I clawed my way out of paycheck to paycheck. And the biggest difference is that chronic anxiety about what do I do if I get a puncture and need a new tire is gone. That anxiety takes years of your life and saps joy. Story 74. There is no end to them. The further up the ladder you climb, the more you see, but you don't get to the top. Even the people in the I'm buying an island bracket are jealous of the people who are buying a bigger island where they can land their jet instead of having to take a boat like a poor. Find a place where you're happy and just learn to be happy. Story 75. Things get significantly cheaper once you're well off. You stop paying interest and start making it, then you're rich. Story 76. My Phil created generational wealth for our children with the business he built. I wouldn't say we both grew up in poverty, but definitely lower middle class with no skin in the game. The absolute privilege it affords us and our children now is astounding. Aside from my husband now running the business and being able to take off whenever we want because of Massam, afford vacations we could only dream of as kids, not worry about trivial day-to-day tasks, mishaps, costs. The most rewarding thing is we can be present for our children in a way that our parents physically could not because they were constantly trying to make ends meet. Story 77. Time is more valuable than their money, so they will spend what they have to spend to preserve their time. I worked at a small FBO in a quiet airport that dealt with a lot of private jets. This one particular day, we had some passengers show up during some bad weather. Their arrival time paired with the weather caused their ferry to be canceled. The only other option was to take another ferry that was about an hour away. They landed at 3:30. The ferry in the next state over left at 5 Waj. The husband looked at me and said, "Can you take us to the Point Judith ferry?" I responded, "Unfortunately, no. That would be too far of a trip for us to take." He then responded with, "How would you like to make 200? I said I'll grab the keys to the crew car. I got him to the ferry 15 minutes early. He put another 100 in the cup holder, totaling my amount to 300 for a 50-minute ride. He could have easily gotten a hotel room and stayed the night and waited for the ferry the next morning, but this is how a lot of the wealthy are. They want what they want now. Story 78. I'm not exactly rich, but definitely well off now compared to when I was growing up. We live in a wealthy area, and I work with a lot of very wealthy people. The most surprising and insulting thing I have learned is how poor rich people think they are. I know someone who makes $200K, and their wife makes $100K, and they complained about poor kids wanting free lunch while insinuating it isn't fair because they personally aren't well off either, but have to pay their fair share. I know another couple where the husband makes $200K, wife is stay-at-home mom, and they own the most ridiculously expensive art pieces in their house. They are always complaining about how much of a struggle life is because so much of their money goes to taxes while living in a relatively low cost of living area. I wish I was exaggerating. As someone who grew up with food scarcity issues and only ever owning one pair of shoes at a time, it really disgusts me to hear these rich people think they're poor while going on lavish vacations and driving nice cars, endless wardrobes, fridges filled with food. I don't have an issue with people being wealthy. I'm not in a bad financial situation myself, but to equate a $200K household income to living in borderline poverty is gross. Story 79. My dad grew up pretty poor. In early 20s, late 30s, when I was a kid living with him, it was rough. Living in a trailer, white bread and cheese sandwiches for dinner, saltines and peanut butter for treats, etc. In his late 30s, he landed a really good job and worked his way up the chain and became COO of the company he worked for. The only way you could tell he has money now is if you actually went to his house. He lives on over 100 acres of land and has some really nice outdoor toys. But if you saw him in the grocery store or driving around, he just wears old white t-shirts with some food stains, sweats and slip-on shoes, driving a 20-year-old truck. He never flaunts it to people. One of my favorite moments with him, we went to Disney on Ice with my kid, and there was a little girl and family you could tell weren't well off. Cheap seats, no snacks, and their little girl kept asking for cotton candy. You could hear the mom saying they couldn't afford. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.